Before we begin, today's episode includes a discussion of stalking, kidnapping, sexual violence, and trauma. Some listeners may find portions of this conversation difficult, so listener discretion is advised.
Somebody busts through the door and jumps on me, and I begin screaming and puts his hands across my throat. And I immediately recognize it as Christopher, and I think, of course this is him. I ended up faking passing out because I was having a hard time breathing. He pulls the blindfold off, and I'm in this 7x7 room with soundproofing. And he tells me, we are going to be here for 2 weeks. I took 2 weeks vacation and we're going to spend some time together. The judge that was in charge of sentencing in this case was actually the judge that denied my PPO. You could see the moment it clicked with him what the case was.
This episode of the Warriors Way podcast is brought to you by CCW Solutions Group. If you're thinking about getting your concealed carry but don't know where to start, we guide you through the process step by step. Head over to ccwsolutionsgroup.com to get started. There are moments in life when strength doesn't look like fighting. Strength, or sometimes strength, means remaining calm, understanding the person in front of you, and doing whatever is necessary to survive. Samantha Stites endured more than a decade of stalking. She sought protection through the legal system, obtained a protection order, documented the behavior, and repeatedly tried to make it stop. But in October of 2022, the threat escalated into an unmanageable act of violence when Samantha was kidnapped and held captive in a soundproof bunker. Through extraordinary composure, intelligence, and courage, Samantha survived. Today, she's a licensed social worker, survivor advocate, and founder of the Beekeepers Academy, an initiative dedicated to protecting victims, educating the public, and changing the system that too often fails people experience stalking and domestic violence. This conversation is about survival, but it is also about responsibility. What we must do when people tell us that they're being stalked, what the judicial system must learn, and how one survivor is turning her pain into a mission. Samantha Stites, welcome to the Warriors Way.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Of course. So before your name was connected to this story, can you tell us who you were?
Yeah, probably an average sort of Midwest girl. I'm from Michigan. I studied social work. I have a master's degree. I enjoy sports. I play and coach soccer. I spend a lot of time kayaking, snowboarding, love the outdoors. Just kind of your average college student, I'd say, before the stalking began. Obviously through it all, I pursued my social work license and had nothing to do really with why I was pursuing that, but it's been a helpful, and I attribute some of my education to why I was able to survive.
So the people that were closest to you prior to this happening, how would they describe you?
I think folks that know me would describe me as a bit stubborn, independent. I grew up with a single mom. It was just me and her most of the time growing up, and I mean, she worked at a bar, she worked, minimum wage jobs to try to make ends meet. I was kind of estranged from my dad a bit. And a lot of it was kind of me growing up on my own, her away at work, or, things like that, and just trying to make it on my own. I was always a good student. I think folks would describe me as intelligent, blunt at times, but overall kind, funny. I'm kind of a cut to the chase sort of person. I'd say that's probably how folks would describe me.
So what drew you to social work and helping others?
Initially, I had always kind of grown up knowing I wanted to do something that was going to help other people. Initially, I thought, the medical field. I always excelled in math and science and found those topics interesting. I think during college, the farther I got in that education, the more I saw some of the rifts within the American healthcare system and how folks that are or are physically healthy um, may be struggling in other ways in terms of mental health or their own belonging. And I ended up kind of pivoting gears and speaking with an advisor and changing my major to social work because of that, to help others in a different way.
Yeah, so social workers often see like the best in people. Is that something that you've always naturally seen or naturally, has that been you? Like you always see the best in people?
I like to try. Certainly, I'd kind of describe myself as a realist, skeptical of folks at the same time, but assuming everyone's just doing the best they can with what they've got. Um, yeah, I would say I kind of always fell in the middle in terms of assuming, the best intent, but, being prepared, doing all the things that a young woman should on a college campus, not walking alone at night, not going to parties and drinking from things offered to me that, I didn't pour myself, things like that. Um,
Interesting. So you were in social work in college when you first met Christopher Thomas. Christopher Thomas is the person that would end up stalking you for 13 years, and then really
mhm.
the 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 evil part of this story, for a lack of better terms. Do you think that seeing the best in people and giving people an opportunity to really be the best person that they can, do you think that that played a part in I guess his, not his, but your view of him initially?
Perhaps. I didn't know that you're not like trying to infer this, but it's never, a victim's fault of how they behave in terms of like why they happen to attract someone who stalks. I mean, I do think that, yeah, I was somebody, a young college student. I, had the pressure of like feeling like I needed to be welcoming in this new, like, as a new member of this faith group I was a part of, to be kind and courteous to someone, even if they were a little awkward. And so I'd say I kind of felt that pressure to be that kind, welcoming person. I wouldn't say I in any way went out of my way to be kind to Christopher initially.
Sure.
Um,
It was just who
you
you
know,
were.
but
You were kind to people. I also, it's something, one of the things we hadn't discussed. I was also deeply involved in the church and stuff like that growing up. Part of the youth ministry team, the worship team of my church, and we don't prejudge people. We give everyone like the same, for a lack of better terms, this the same attention, the same open heart, caring, that
Mhm.
type of thing. We want people to feel welcome, but
Yep.
sometimes that can be misperceived, right? So not on anything on your part, but when you open the door to people that have a mental illness, and I don't know if this is how we would characterize Christopher, but at some point he probably thought what he was doing was completely natural.
Yeah, probably. And it started, relatively innocently. In that era, I mean, it was 2011 when I met him on a college campus, and he was older. He was, 6, 7, 8 years older than the bulk of us, and that alone was a bit odd. And in that era, it was really common. You meet people on campus, you connect with them on Facebook. Sometimes you'll direct message, use Messenger, that sort of thing. That was really common in that era. So when I received communication from him in that way, it wasn't unusual to me to connect with an acquaintance in that way.
So stalking, like I said, I spent 20 years in law enforcement. I've actually taken quite a few reports on not incidents like yours, but the escalation of stalking. And those things rarely start with an act that is immediately recognized as dangerous. So it's that build up, that communication, right? So were there any behaviors? What were the first behaviors that made you feel uncomfortable with Christopher?
I'd say the first things that actually made me uncomfortable and kind of showed me that there was something wrong. I mean, certainly interacting with somebody who's socially awkward is can be uncomfortable, but that in itself wasn't necessarily threatening in any way. I think really it was when he had approached me and was asking me on dates or trying to buy me tickets to a hockey game or showing up to my work with roses. And specifically once I had not just given him the polite like, oh, sorry, I'm busy, or indirect ways that folks often try to shirk a potential date with somebody when they're not interested. I think it really became clear that there was some red flags going on when I blocked his number and I asked him to leave me alone, and it continued. Um, was
So
really when there was something wrong.
yeah, right. So for those, like I watched an episode with you uh, for those of our viewers that don't know like what happened. Can you kind of give us a play by play of what happened, and then we'll ask some questions about that.
Yeah, kind of like through the college years specifically. Okay. Um, yeah, and it was kind of a slow sort of burn. So, like if you're, use the example of cooking a frog or a crab or something in hot water, you put them in when it's room temperature and they're fine, but they don't hop out when it starts getting hot because it's familiar. And I feel like a lot of it escalated so slowly that it was, messages and things I would or wouldn't respond to. I was never hanging out with him alone or anything. We never went on dates. But for about 3 years, those last 3 years of my undergrad experience, we were in these large group kind of faith settings. And as I had overtly denied him dates and I asked him to leave me alone, was really when things escalated. When, at one point he admitted I was like, arrived to my car after my internship and I found a single rose on my car. And this was like a new internship, a relatively big city. And so it was very odd to me. It wasn't signed or anything. I find out eventually it was him. It was Christopher. And he admitted to me just rather, offhand, like, well, yeah, I drove a half hour from the campus, outside of the city to where you lived, and I followed you to your internship, and then I left you a rose on your car. And to him, it seemed very normal. He didn't, to me, I was like, that's not a normal thing somebody does. And I made that clear that was really inappropriate, and I didn't want him to talk with me. I didn't, specified all the things I didn't want to do and see him, hear from him, following me, those things. And it was like he just couldn't take no for an answer. He'd stop, leave me alone for a while, and I'd see him again on campus. He, would try to bring me flowers. He showed up to my work one day, things like that. And, at that point, that was kind of the last major straws. We had this big I say kind of like a blowout, but I was just so angry at the situation. What am I saying that's not English? What are you not understanding?
Right.
I want you to leave me alone, and if you don't, I'm going to start pursuing things. And so he stopped like approaching me, but I started seeing him between classes. I started seeing him. I played for like on a ultimate frisbee club team on campus. It was just women. And I would like see him up in the track above the practice or sitting like in the bleachers, the only person there. And so I was getting the sense that he was following me. And by the time all of this had happened, I was kind of on the brink of graduation when I was about to move, start my life. And I think, well, really, I mean, can I really get him in trouble for this? The campus police, what I had heard from other folks was, they don't take complaints seriously. My friend had this happen, and this is kind of what they ended up doing. And so I thought, this is a problem that's going to stay on this campus. And once I leave and move, it's going to solve the issue. And when it didn't was really when I, decided it's time to get law enforcement involved. And honestly, it probably should have happened sooner, but it seemed like it wasn't a threatening situation. He was an awkward guy who couldn't take no, and it just happened over such a long period that I don't think I identified it really as stalking until I had moved off campus, and he drove 3 hours to come find me in my hometown, which is like a small one stoplight town, and drove around until he found me and said, "Hey, I'm going to go to the same internship out of state you are. Can I ride with you?" And I was just heartbroken and angry. And so it was at this point that a family friend, we talked about it and decided we needed to file for a personal protection order.
Interesting. And that protection order obviously was granted, right? So when initially, what do people misunderstand about when they say, "Oh, he's just socially awkward," or just tell them, because your experience is different from other people's experience. So they say, when you talk to people, like, "Hey, Christopher's showing up," like, "Oh, he's just tell him you're not interested." What do they not understand about when you are being stalked and they see it as, "Oh, he's just being socially awkward"? It's a pattern of unwanted attention and really control. But other people that aren't experiencing it, they might dismiss that.
Yeah, I think the pattern and the context is really important. Having received a flower, for example, or something, those can send very different messages from versus like seeing somebody on campus isn't a big deal, but when you're seeing them way more frequently than you should, based on how many people are on that campus, you're catching his glances, so to speak, as you walk by, things like that. I think those things are significant, and I think it's something that really only the person who's receiving it can really understand, that when there's something off often. And certainly it's that repeated pattern and just complete disregard for someone's own personal boundaries. Initially I thought, well, maybe he's just not quite getting it. He's just socially awkward. Maybe he's not taking my non-answers or silence as a no. Maybe I have to tell him, "No, I'm not interested." Maybe I have to tell him, "No, I want you to leave me alone." Maybe I have to block his number for him to get it. And there comes a point where it's undeniable. And that's really, I think, where it shifts when you're communicating with somebody clearly, and there's really no denying that. At that point, it's them putting their own needs and desires above your own, and it can be very dangerous.
Absolutely. So what kind of documentation did you need to provide in order to obtain the protective order? And I'm asking because there may be people that are watching this episode and they're like, "Oh, I'm experiencing the same thing." Like, what? How should someone prepare when they're going to get that protection order?
Yeah, I think, and I didn't necessarily, obviously, as I wasn't aware that I needed to be documenting things as they happened. Hindsight's always 2020. I provided a very thorough statement of every situation and encounter that I could recall, concisely, but it was, a couple pages worth of the history of what had happened. I had statements from friends or folks I knew that were witnesses to these different events and what had happened, make statements as well. And at that point, because it was hindsight, I didn't necessarily have photographic evidence per se, or, that sort of thing. But my statements and communicating why I felt this person was a threat and how long it had been going on and, what his reactions to me asking him to leave me alone were, having that information reviewed, the judge granted a 6-year PPO, which is unheard of in most places. It was the longest that judge had ever granted it, and he's now at the end of his career.
Yeah, so restraining orders generally are what, 3 years, 3 to 5 years?
Can be 6 months, 2 years, a year. It varies. It's infrequent to see them over 2 years, but it depends on the state and where you're at.
So, and when the restraining order was submitted, did he have an opportunity to respond to it?
So there's different types, at least in Michigan, there's different types of protection orders, and I had requested this be like an ex parte order. I actually was moving out of state within a couple days, and I wanted I wanted something to be in place at least before I left so that I could continue that if I needed in a different state. And so the ex parte order meant that there wasn't a hearing required, and the judge granted that aspect of it as well, reviewing the information. He didn't need to collect more information from Christopher. He granted it, and he could be served with a personal protection order without a hearing.
Nice. So when the order was granted, did you finally feel like the system's working for you? You felt safe at the time?
I did. Yeah, I felt like, if he's not going to listen to me and he doesn't care what I have to say, he's probably going to listen to the police. Being served, and I didn't even know where he was living. I didn't know, anything really at this time. So serving him was difficult as well. It was this, I know he mentioned something about a family member in this city and kind of sleuthing to try to figure out where he may be, in the summer. And, yeah, I felt like at that point it was, well, this isn't just my responsibility now. There's other people involved. And it gave me that element of safety that if I do see him and if he is trying to contact me, that there's some recourse for his actions, that I could contact the police and, he could be in trouble for violating a protection order.
Sure, of course. One of the things that I always tell people, and I have told countless people, men and women, that the restraining order is only good if someone follows it, though. So fortunately for you, Christopher had enough sense to say, okay, I don't want to get in any trouble with law enforcement, so I'm going to back off for a while.
He seemingly backed off.
Right.
I think in folks that are as obsessed and I'll say depraved in his situation, that all that did was really cause him to dig deeper and become more creative about how he monitored me. And I didn't know about this before. And also when I filed that initial PPO, I was never told that he had a prior PPO from another woman previously. That was never information I found out until after I had been kidnapped by him.
Yeah, so but the judicial system knew about it, correct?
I mean, somebody must have. It was in a different county. The PPOs were in different counties within the same state, and I don't know if the judge that granted mine knew that he had that. I would assume if he did, he maybe would have told me, but I don't know. I don't know if anyone really did that investigation. I think had I known that information, I probably would have done something sooner.
Yeah, absolutely. So the restrainer was good for 6 years. Uh, in 2020, it expired. Is that correct?
Um,
20.
yeah, late 2019, early 2020.
Yeah. What happened after it expired?
Around that same time, I moved back to northern Michigan. I had lived in another state. Seemingly, the Christopher issue was totally done. 5 years, I hadn't talked to him. To my knowledge, I hadn't seen him, those kinds of things. Little did I know he had posed as someone and interacted with a blog I created.
So
And
he hadn't
then
stopped
created.
communication. He just pretended he was someone else. And were you
Yeah.
communicating with him? Not knowing.
Not a lot, a little bit, but by email. This person posed as a woman that had questions about things I wrote, the discussion was very connected to the things I wrote, and related to theology, related to social work, related to suffering. Some of these things that I had been writing about, and he then posed as that person that he made up, fake photographs, all this, and ended up following me on social media, which was a private, medium I had had. Because of all of this, all of that information was private. So he gained this entry point into a private life by posing as someone else, which is concerning. But to my knowledge, at the time, the Christopher situation is completely over.
Sure. How
And
does it
I
make
moved back
you?
to northern Michigan and start my life.
Yeah. So in 2020, he reappears, correct?
Yeah, I am shocked at this point and panicked, that sinking feeling in your stomach. I see him at a public park, and this is kind of my hometown area. It's in a little bit larger city, but this wasn't where he was from. And so I was shocked to see him there. I guess could have been coincidental, but there was no hello, there was no acknowledgement that he recognized me. But I had no doubt that it was him. And the first thing I thought was, is this intentional?
Sure. Was there like a sense of fear? Like, oh my gosh, like
Yes.
uncertainty? I
Yeah.
mean, I
And
can't even imagine, but
yeah, I oscillated between, either this is a really unfortunate coincidence, and if it's not, certainly he's gonna try to get in touch with me or see me or talk to me or something. Um, and he never, even until the day he kidnapped me, he never tried to talk to me. He never tried to get in touch with me. He never sent me a letter. He never called me. Nothing.
right. So that kind of went on in, from my research. It kind of went on for a couple of years. So, but in July of 2022, you tried to get another restraining order. What what made you
Yeah.
believe that it had escalated to the point where you were in danger again?
Yeah, it was kind of similar in that it was different in that he was never contacting me. And in some ways he had smartened up after, what had been done. But I began seeing him too frequently. Like I said, it was odd because he never tried to talk to me. He never, but I would see him multiple times per week. I would see him at the gym. I'd run into him at the grocery store. If we were in a town of 100 people, maybe, but it's even in a city our size, there's no way that was just coincidental.
Sure.
And it was troubling how frequently I was seeing him. And so, I'm talking with my friends about it. I'm saying, I'm seeing him again. He's not talking to me, but it's too odd to be true. We suspect that he might be tracking me somehow, like by my vehicle or something. How else does he show up places I am? We can't find any sort of trackers or air tags. I have a mechanic look at it. Can't find anything. And it just becomes, it was tormenting me. It was
Right.
tormenting me.
How did that change your everyday decisions, knowing that you're constantly being watched? I mean, it's got to be like very unsettling for you to be like, I can't even go out of my house. How did that like change your decisions every day?
Yeah, it was tough because I felt like, I'm not doing anything wrong. Why should I have to completely change my life? And what's going to stop him if I, hole up in my house? What's to stop him if he can't see me anymore from coming into my house? I can't not grocery shop. I can't not walk my dog. I can't, do basic things. And it was definitely nerve wracking. I mean, I'm taking note of cars I see drive around the neighborhood. I'm a reasonably safe person. It's not like I walk alone at night. I don't wear headphones when I'm out and about. I lived in a safe neighborhood. I wasn't, I had a location shared with a friend. We locked our doors and windows. I was at that point I was sleeping with a sharp axe under my mattress, because I worried about my own safety. And it was this weird dance between my friends are saying, like, what can you do to keep yourself safe? And I'm like, I mean, short of changing my name and moving and, all these different things, like, what do you expect me to do? And so it became apparent. I actually knew someone who worked at the assistant prosecutor's office in my county, which was adjacent to the county I previously had the PPO in, and told her what was going on. And she said, I can connect you with an advocate. Do you want help filing for a new PPO? And I eventually, yeah, I think I do. I don't know. It's odd because he's not contacting me. He's not meeting a lot of those kind of basic criteria that you think of when you think of stalking. And so, short of trying to take photographs and prove that we were at the same places at the same time, I didn't have a lot of other things to go on. And I suspected that, unless a judge were to take into his previous, our previous history and read the statements from the past and current what's going on, that I suspected that it's possible it would be denied, or that at the very least they would, make us appear at a hearing. And that's exactly what happened. They said it appeared to be a complicated relationship, and,
And you're like,
we
it's
could,
not a relationship. I don't understand don't classify it as a relationship. This is someone that's been stalking me for years. This has got to be very frustrating for you
yeah.
when,
And I referenced my previous PPO. I think I provided that information as well. And I don't think there's any indicator that they really read through what I wrote or looked into his history or anything. They just said, come to the courthouse and we'll look into it more. And I was too terrified. That shows, if we show up, that means that he knows that I know that he's following me. That puts me at risk. We're appearing at the same building. And if it's not granted and he's angry about, me doing that in the first place, what's to protect me at that point? So I didn't opt to go or arrange a hearing. I thought, hey, I've showed them all my cards. I've described what's going on. I'm a good writer. I provided all the evidence I had. I had an assistant prosecutor help me with it. It wasn't like I filled paperwork out wrong. And I just thought, well, if they truly read it and heard it and aren't going to grant it, then I guess I need to keep collecting evidence to make them believe me.
Absolutely. And so you feel like the court failed to see like the totality of everything, and saw this as
Yeah.
an isolated incident, right?
I'm not convinced that they even really reviewed what I wrote or looked back at the previous PPO or reviewed his criminal history. I'm not positive. I'm very doubtful that any of those things happened.
Well, if it's anything like the information between the first protection order that was with another woman and the one with you, just lets you believe that the systems don't talk to each other, and that's unfortunate, right? The, I can tell you that, and it was a different county. So
Yep.
the restraining order system works, it's supposed to work nationwide, but a lot of the counties don't have a tool in place to be able to communicate with each other. They all have their own system. It's just change needs to happen. I can tell you that. So on behalf of law enforcement, I want to apologize and the judicial system, because I was part of the judicial system for many years. So I know I didn't have anything to do with it, but I want to say, hey, I'm sorry for that lack of I don't want to say empathy, but a lack of investigation, a totality of it. So let's move from now your restraining order. It was denied. When it was denied, how did that make you feel?
It kind of made me feel crazy. Like, okay, it's on me to prove that this is happening and that I'm actually in danger. It's up to me to potentially protect myself. It was disheartening, the place you go to when you finally feel like you're, for somebody who is as independent and, self-sufficient as me, to say, I need help and to ask for that and be denied. It's disheartening and it's frightening, not knowing. Yeah, I mean, there were moments there was one time in particular, I had been out with a friend and they dropped me back off at home, and it was kind of dusk or so, getting to be dark. And as we pulled up, I saw a man that looked like Christopher, and I thought that he was running away from the direction of my house, like through the woods or down the street. And this was during kind of that period of time. And I run out and I take off down the road because I'm like, I know what I saw, and I can't find anybody. And I think, are my eyes playing tricks on me? Am I losing it? But like, why, if it was him, like, where did he come from? Where would he, I lived this kind of quiet cul-de-sac, where would he have disappeared to? And later I found out when he kidnapped me that was Christopher, that I wasn't seeing things, that he, because I was out with a friend, he didn't know when I'd be coming home. And when I returned home, he actually was kind of staking out my house,
Yeah,
and evading the cameras I had set up.
sure, of course. When in watching your story, I have always been, from the time that I was a child, like a protector, right? I'm like gonna help the meek, the weak, however you want to describe it. And I was like, oh, like if a friend had told me like this was happening, I'm like, all right, I'm sleeping on your couch for the next year, type of thing. I'm sure you had friends that were like, we're gonna help you, like,
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I had people that got me ring cameras, people that were like, set me up, were trying to find trackers on my vehicle, offering me different vehicles to drive, like, you know, yeah, I'll stay with you. Like, are you, what, offering anything they could.
the
And
support system was there, just not from the judicial system.
yeah.
Yeah, dang. Well, I mean, it's good that you at least had something, or people, I mean, people in place that care. So moving forward to October 2022, right? Can you share what happened, whatever you're comfortable with? Share
Yeah.
the events about that really kind of brought this whole story together.
Yeah, so I had a roommate at the time, and she had started a new job at the hospital, and she had to get up a bit earlier than me to leave for work. And she was aware of, my concerns about Christopher, and I told her, hey, when you leave, make sure you go out the front door because you can lock it. If you go out the rear slider, you can't really lock a slider from the outside. At least ours, you couldn't. And so to my knowledge, that had been happening on this. And there was about a 45-minute to an hour gap from when she left to when I usually got up in the morning. So in this particular day, I guess she had left out the back slider. She was in a hurry, whatever, doesn't matter, went out the back slider. I don't think that's important. I think that even if everything was locked, he would have still found a way in.
Sure, of course.
Just like a
If not that day,
PPO.
another day.
Yeah, and if just like how a PPO is a piece of paper, it's not going to physically prevent someone from following you or attacking you. And in that period of time, Christopher had entered my home, and um, my bedroom was downstairs, and I was asleep, and I had had some water damage from the previous owners in a few floorboards outside my door that I had been working on repairing, and there was a squeak when you stepped on them. So if you got near the threshold, my pets weren't big enough to make it squeak, but like a human step would. And I was very familiar with what it sounded like. I'm a very light sleeper, and so I hear this squeak, and I wake up. I'm obviously on edge this whole time anyway, because of what's going on. And I think, okay, like, is this my roommate? I think there's somebody out there, like, unless I was dreaming that. And my door is like open a bit, and I kind of see a shadow that isn't what it normally looks like outside my door. And so I called out, for my roommate. And I was like, is there somebody there? And I'm like, I really feel like there's somebody there. And I'm like, if there's somebody's on the other side of my door, I'm not getting robbed because they would just be robbing me. If there's somebody on the other side of the door, I'm their target. And so I'm like, I don't know, maybe I am just crazy. Maybe all this stress is getting to me. I don't know, but I need to figure out what's going on. And so I reach over and I think, well, I've got this axe that I can reach for, and I can grab that. And something within me just reminds me, like, hearing about, when you introduce a weapon to something where there's an altercation where there's not a weapon and you're not prepared, it's possible for that weapon to be used against you. And I think, well, whoever's on the other side of that door is more prepared than I am. Do they have a gun? Do they have a weapon? If they don't, are they going to be able to get this weapon from me? And I think I just need to figure out what's going on. So I reach for my lamp to turn on the light, and somebody busts through the door and jumps on me, and I begin screaming, and he puts his hands across my throat, and begins like choking me. And I immediately recognize it as Christopher, and I think, of course this is him. Like, and now he's going to kill me. And I was like, oh my gosh, I was right. Like, I'm not crazy, first of all, but also this is how I'm gonna die now. And it was very bleak. There was a struggle, and he ended up I ended up faking passing out because I was having a hard time breathing. And I thought, if I can get him to get off of me, maybe I can reach for the weapon. Maybe there's some other way out of this. And he lets off of me and he reaches for this bag where he has handcuffs. He binds my feet and hands. He puts a ball gag in my mouth and gorilla tapes my whole head. With this ball gag in my mouth, and I just think, like, he's gonna rape and kill me. And I said to him, like, if you're gonna rape me, just do it. Like, I don't, if that's what you're here for, like, clearly I don't know what else is in that bag, but you mean business. And, I'm not faster, I'm not stronger than him. Um, and he's like, I just want to talk. And I'm like, this isn't how you talk to somebody. I've never, when people want to talk to me, they say they would like to talk, or they, text me or call me or write me a letter, or there's plenty of ways in this day and age. And, he said, no, we can't talk here. And so I think immediately, like, okay, he's moving me to a different location. He's for sure going to kill me. And he takes me to this soundproofed bunker, essentially. I'm blindfolded. I can kind of see over the blindfold when he's not like holding me. But he takes me in my car with my dog.
What kind of dog did you have, by the way?
I had a golden doodle who was like 15, 14. He was as sweet as can be. And he didn't have any teeth. He was getting up there.
Yeah.
And part of the reason, having me encourage him to bring the dog, followed me everywhere. Like, he would have had to kick the dog out of the car for that to happen. And I thought, if he's got another thing to keep track of, this dog is this other connection. It gives me a better chance of surviving. I have a gist that I'm not far from home. We're not in the car very long. He gets lost leaving my subdivision.
Oh, he did.
First of all, he can't figure out how to get the key out of my fob. And he's like the dumbest criminal. And I'm like, I don't want to help him, but I don't want to, have him retaliate at me for being uncooperative. So I kind of play stupid, and I keep it cool. I think if I piss him off, he's gonna, off me even sooner if that's what he wants. And so he takes me to this, box he's created. I can't see it as that. I can see that I'm going through a threshold. I smell lumber. I hear like a garage door opening. And he sets me on this soft surface, this twin-sized bed. And I look around. He pulls the blindfold off. And I'm in this like 7 by 7 room with soundproofing. And he's not very tall. I mean, I could touch the ceiling. I'm 5'3". It's maybe 6 feet tall. And I just think, okay, this is where he's going to rape and kill me then. And it's like he's set up for everything. I mean, there's bins with water, there's food, there's a bucket with a lid for a bathroom, there's, things that you could survive with. And he tells me, we're going to be here for 2 weeks. I took 2 weeks vacation and we're going to spend some time together. And I just think there's no way I could spend 2 weeks with him. And what could he want from me? Why, if he says he wants to talk, well, I'm a social worker. I can talk to people. And I at least know who this person is. And I have a suspicion if he's not just angry and wants to kill me, that he's infatuated with me and wants to rape me and then maybe kill me. And I mean, we talk a good chunk of the day. I get a sense of like what his intentions are. I try to appease him as best I can. Pissing off your captor is probably not the way to ensure your life. And I learned that he jumped the gun. He wanted to take more time to prepare this bunker and be ready to kidnap me than what he did, but me hearing him really blew his cover. Um,
Oh, so he
and
actually didn't even have a plan to take you that night. He just wanted to be inside the house. Is that what I'm hearing? Or-
that's what I'm getting the sense of, is that he was doing a trial run, perhaps, and that he wasn't sure that he was actually going to kidnap me that day or not.
Do you
He
think
was
that he had
prepared
been
to,
inside
though.
your house before?
I think he maybe had. I wouldn't be surprised. How? I'm not sure. I mean, unless roommate had left the back door open scenario, or just enough surveillance of the home, maybe. Um,
So I know you've got some extensive mental health training. Were you looking for an opportunity to physically escape or communicate your way out of it?
it was pretty, it was clear soon, like early on, that I was not going to be able to overpower him physically unless I could find a weapon or something. Um, it was pretty clear to me that, there are deadbolts, there's padlocks on this door, there's multiple doors to get into this bunker. I get the sense we're also within a garage, or it was a storage unit he had rented. And, unless I could get the keys from him and incapacitate him in some way, I didn't get this. He was my way to get out. So early on, I was like, I'm going to have an easier time unless he can fall asleep and I can somehow get out of this situation. I'm going to have an easier time convincing him to let me go, I think, than trying to physically get out. I mean, there were multiple locks. It was a soundproofed room. Um, it's not like I didn't have access to phones or, things like that. I was chained to the wall at the beginning. So it was, I was in the only real option for me was to try to convince this person to let me go. So, thankfully I had some foreknowledge of who he was and, what he was interested in, and was able to stay calm and get a sense of what his motivations were for kidnapping me.
What do people misunderstand about the decisions that victims like yourself make while they're being held under force? Like people are going to say, well, why didn't you fight harder? Or why didn't you do this? Like, what do people misunderstand about this about your decision to not like physically fight or.
And I did at the beginning. And given he's much faster, much stronger than I am, I was in bed. I didn't have a way to really fight back versus a 200-pound man on top of me. And I think we're hardwired to survive. And I think that our brains are really incredible. You know, what we're, we know what self-preservation techniques to use just instinctively. Um, and I think there would have probably been more fighting or more, other options, but all of those potential options were very clearly not going to be the way I was going to get out. Um, and I think somebody knows that, if you're fighting back and you get injured, your likelihood to be able to escape later on is going to be harder. And so, I was dead set on trying to remain as physically and mentally intact as I could, because if he injured me in some way, or if he didn't trust me and kept me bound to this chain on the wall, then there was no way I was going to figure out if there was a weapon in the room. There was no way I was going to be able to easily convince him to let me go. So it was clear that was going to have a much easier time trying to talk my way out of it than,
Right. So you had to gain his trust throughout the
yeah.
entire situation. So he had a plan to keep you there for 2 weeks. What happened? I mean, clearly weren't there for 2 weeks, right?
No. And the more we talked, the more I got a sense that he didn't have a full plan hashed out. He didn't have an exit plan. What's going to happen after 2 weeks? Are you just going to open the door? You know, After 24 hours, people are going to be looking for me, definitely, and he's going to be the first suspect, based on, all that had been going on. Any of my friends would have said immediately, if Sam's missing, look at Christopher Thomas. A matter of finding me might have been a little bit more difficult, but he had plans to try to fake my death, that I took the day off work in October, would take my paddleboard out and drown. I wouldn't go skip work and go paddleboard in October. He had some funky ideas to try to throw police, to keep things going for 2 weeks, but he didn't really have an exit plan. And so I kind of talked him through that. Like, okay, if we're here I was like, first of all, I'm not going to be here 2 weeks. Like, I got things to do. You may have taken 2 weeks of vacation. I did not. I have plans. I have a life. I have people that care for me, and just me disappearing. Like, I was angry. Like, I didn't let him know that I was angry, but to just assume you can take someone for 2 weeks of their life, aside from kidnapping them. I mean, that really, just the arrogance in that really pissed me off. And I kind of started seeing a lot of holes in his plan, and I could tell that he didn't have a good answer for a lot of those things. If this is the case and this is what's going to happen, this scenario is going to escalate really quickly. And either you're going to end up dead, or I'm going to end up dead, or both, or there's going to be a big problem. And I don't know that he had a good answer for that, other than us just hiding out for 2 weeks. There was no, how do we get out of this? And so I kind of pitched, Christopher, people are going to be looking for me, by, if it's nighttime and I don't show up anywhere. I have a roommate. She's going to know that me being gone, I wouldn't just leave and leave my cats, home. I wouldn't just disappear. And so we've got this window to make this not a big deal. If you truly are afraid of getting in trouble for what you've done, he acknowledged, I screwed up. I did something bad. I kidnapped you. And I was like, yeah, that was bad. And, how do we get out of this now? You can let me go, and it's possible none of this escalates further than what's already happened. But that's your decision. And how do we, I learned that he said, I've thought about you every day since the day I met you. If you would, I would marry you. And I'm like, no, I don't like you like that. I'm actually in a relationship with someone, and I have never liked you like that, and I've told you that, and I have no interest in you. Like, we can talk and clear the air, but that's not going to happen. And we kind of come to this impasse where I'm like, the clock is ticking, and he's already committed a crime. How does he want to get out of this now? And it just, we kind of run out of things to talk about. And I'm to the point where I have him convinced that there's a possibility that maybe we could be friends. He wanted just desperately to have some sort of friendship or relationship with me in some way. And, like, Christopher, I'm really hurt by what you did to me this morning and what's happened. But now I understand where you've been all these years. And, it sounds like you've been living a really lonely life, and you're, desperate, and you haven't known how to talk to me and all these things. And, like, you didn't need to kidnap me to talk to me. And if that's what you want, maybe there's a way that we can both get what we want. You can let me go. You don't have to commit more crimes. Maybe we can get out of this. He's like, well, I'm going to go to jail. I mean, you're going to have to you're going to tell the police. And I said, well, if I don't, what happens if I don't? Let's play that out. What if I don't tell the police what's happened? Can you let me go? Can this not escalate further? Is there a way to get what you want out of this and get me out of this situation? Knowing full well that, of course, I'm going to go to the police. I've been kidnapped. And
But you had to
he just
convince him
doesn't.
that you weren't going to go to the police.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he felt that was very risky. He felt like I had his life in his in my hands. And how ironic is that to say that? I've trusted you with my life all day, Christopher. Look what you've done to me. All the tape ripped the skin off my lips. My lips were like bloody. I had tape all stuck in my hair. I was chained to a wall. And and I knew that it was going to come to this. At one point, he left me alone in this bunker, which was perhaps more terrifying than him being there because I have no way out and no way. If he got hit by a car and died, how would anybody find me? I'm there dead silent alone. And the second time he left me alone, he had enough trust in me that he didn't chain me to the wall. And I searched the whole place for anything I could use as a weapon and, make some plans. What can I do to, if this does go on and he falls asleep, is there anything I could do to knock him out? Is there any weapons I could use? How can I get out of this situation if I am given an opportunity? Where are the things in this bunker located? And in that, I found some peculiar objects and things. He didn't have any feminine hygiene products. It wasn't like he had pads or tampons, but he had, vaginal cream. He had Vagisil. He had other, treatments for vaginal conditions and medical supplies. And to me, I was like, I know that he wants to have sex with me, and I'm sure that even if I resist and this goes south, there's nothing to prevent him from chaining me to the wall and doing it by force. And, of course, he brings up, the only way I feel like I could trust you, Sam, is if we sleep together. And I was like, it's not going to happen. Like, no, I'm not. I don't sleep with people who are my friends if that's how we're going to move forward. I'm in a relationship. I have no interest in that. Like, there's no way. I don't know why I would have, what does that have to do with earning anyone's trust? And I was like, that's not going to be something that's going to work for me. And he just won't budge on it. And we're getting to the point in the evening where we're just at this impasse. And I'm like, I only have so much time before my roommate gets home, before things start to get critical. He's been awake for maybe 24 hours at this point. I'm starting to lose my cool. And, he leaves because he's frustrated with this scenario we're in. And, he knows he doesn't want things to escalate where I'm relatively convinced unless things go south that he's not going to kill me at this point, but it's still very much a possibility. I think if you're crazy enough to kidnap somebody, you could kill them.
How long am I going to be locked in this box?
How long am I going to be locked in this box, and how agitated is he going to get if police start looking for us? Is he going to start making rash decisions? Am I going to be like a hostage? What's the scenario going to be? And I resolve that if he comes back and doubles down on this, that I can try to push more, but at some point I'm going to have to give that piece up and potentially sleep with him if I can guarantee that he can get me free. If that's the one thing that's going to get me out of this, it's another crime he's committing. Whether or not he understands consent, even if I shook his hand that I would sleep with him after telling him I wasn't interested, no, I wouldn't do it over and over again, and I'm locked in a soundproof bunker, that's not consent.
No, you're a captor at that point. He's a captor, you're captive.
Yeah, and that's essentially what happened. He doubled down on his his resolve that he wouldn't let me go. And I created this sort of handshake contract with him that, Christopher, I've been honest with you all day. You've done these things to me already, and I'm going to have a really hard time if this is what it's going to take to get me out of here. I don't know how we're going to move forward with actually being friends after this. But if this was what it takes you to let me go, then to me, it was worth it. It's another crime he's committing. There's going to be evidence of it. And, if that's what it takes to get me out of this situation, I'd rather that than escalate into the night. And now the police are searching for us. So that's what happens. And I'm banking on the fact that this is somebody who thinks he's honest and has integrity, and that is someone, I'm the person he cares about most in the world, and he cares about my opinion of him. And if I've, asked him to shake on this agreement, if he doesn't follow through with it, you know, now I have a tainted view of it. There's all these psychological things that, are going to want him to uphold that, assuming I have the correct idea of the kind of person he is. And he does. He lets me go after the assault. After a while after the assault, once it's dark, and he had bragged all day. I'm tracking your vehicle. I have been all this time, and these are the pieces I can't quite fill in about what your life is like, and all these things I had suspected and more. And so I get loose. He lets me go. I Because he's tracking my car, I can't just drive to the hospital. I have to play out the scenario. I need to go home. I need to clean myself up, so that my roommate doesn't think there's something weird going on.
That's what you tell him, or that's
That's what I tell him. And so I go home. I know he's still tracking me. I go home, I lock myself in the bathroom, and I call my neighbor who's a nurse, and I say, I need you to stay on the phone with me. Can you take me to the hospital? Something's happened, and I need to go now. And she does that, and I run out of the house. I jump the fence and get in her car, and we go to the hospital, and I get a SANE exam. And I expect he's going to show up at the hospital. It's a terrifying experience, and a SANE exam is demoralizing in itself. And through that process, I get connected with a detective, and a lot of big eyes, like, what happened? And the case moves along. He gets caught within 24 hours, 36 hours maybe.
well. Thank you for sharing that with us, and I'm telling you, I'm so sorry that happened to you. I just, I don't even have words for that. But when you went to the hospital, what was your first interaction with, like, law enforcement? Was it something that they believe you, or like, no way did that happen? Because it seems like a very unbelievable story until all the evidence is collected.
Yeah, I can't imagine calling dispatch with
Oh
that
no,
story.
yeah,
Um, I got to the hospital between like 8:30 and 9 p.m. and I get the SANE exam. I don't speak to anyone in law enforcement until the detective comes at like 3 a.m. Nobody wants to talk to me because they think this is above my pay grade. And I'm thinking, do they not? Okay, this is a crazy story, but either they don't believe me, they don't care, or they're busy, or something. And finally, I hear this detective's coming, and I'm like, okay, well, that must mean it's getting escalated or something. But why hasn't anyone come to take a statement? He's out there. He could be God knows where doing God knows what.
right.
He could be chasing after my family. He could be back at my house. There's any number of things. And if he's fleeing, every hour, every minute counts. So why has nobody, taken a basic statement and gotten background information? So, that was disappointing. But the first person I speak to is Detective Mike Matucci, and he, I didn't know this, but he walks in blind, not really understanding he knew that I had a SANE exam, but he's like, I heard from the nurse there's something with a box. some sort of abduction happened. I don't, and I tell him what's happened, and he's like thinking, oh, okay, this is a significant crimes that have been committed here. Um, and I mean, he believes me. I can tell that the more I start talking, the more I kind of have that sort of sense that he believes me and that, he wants the details and, that this is a significant, investigation that's going to be occurring. I think he did an excellent job.
You know, so I've responded to incidents of sexual assault, and from what I saw in your video, uh, much like you are now, very clear-headed, very, here's everything like that. Like, for me, uh, whenever I've come to an incident not similar to yours, but similar in the sense, there's a lot of like emotions and, you know, crying. I'm sure for the detective, he was like, this is like so unbelievable. And you were relatively calm and just presenting all the facts. So I'm sure you had a chance to talk to him after all of this is done. Have you had a chance to talk to him?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Has he said anything about like your initial interaction? Like,
I mean, I think he was surprised of the crimes just because they don't necessarily fit the bill of, honestly, I feel like people that perpetrate these kind of crimes go after folks that are potentially more vulnerable than what I am, besides the fact that I'm a woman, I guess. But I'm educated, can communicate well, those types of things. And I mean, I think he was surprised by that, but I think he had a good understanding of trauma and that folks can have a wide range of presentations. And I think I was so concerned with, I know this is a ridiculous story. I need to give them as much as I can to prove it to them that this is real. This is where I had the number of squares on the wall. I could describe in depth what this thing looked like that he held me in, what the sheets looked like, what brand the Tupperware bin containers he held supplies in, what types of things he used to construct it, where he bought materials, all of these things, because I was like, there's a place that they can go verify all of this information, and there's no way I would know that unless I was telling the truth. And so part of me was like, I need to be able to back up this story with proof of what's going on. Um, so I think in my traumatic state, that's why partially I think why I did that is because I'm like, I gotta be able, somebody's gotta believe, they'll believe me if they can verify what I say.
sure, sure. The first response, when you disclose it, like how important is the first response, like of the detective, like when you're telling him, again, some officers would be like, oh, like this is an unbelievable story, and I'm glad that he didn't take that response. But from a survivor's standpoint, like how important is that first interaction with law enforcement? Like you have to believe me here.
It's huge. I mean, I had already been not believed by the judicial system. So it was huge. I think I can't imagine. I've not actually teased that out in my mind exactly, because I so didn't even want to go down that road. I was so confident that like there's been so many crimes committed, they're going to be able to prove this. Um, if his initial response had been like, "You got to be kidding me. There's absolutely no way." Like, yeah, right. I don't. I don't know what I would have. I probably would have become emotional at that point. Um, but no, his he started by believing me. I mean, he let the facts prove themselves.
So, for someone that's watching this that has experienced an incident, similar but different, obviously, because no incidents are the same. I can tell you, everybody's trauma is their trauma. What language should law enforcement, should medical providers, like family members, what kind of language should they avoid when they're talking with survivors like this?
Yeah, I think steering away from language or conversation that asks the potential victim or alleged victim, about what they did to welcome something like that. Well, what were you doing that,
Yeah, what were you wearing? What were you,
what were you wearing? Were you drinking? Did you say no? Did you, those types of things. The offender is who you need to be focusing on. They're the person that committed the crime, not the victim. Um, and speaking to them in such a way that not everybody's going to be able to tell especially enduring something very traumatic, not every survivor is going to be able to tell you a timeline. There's a lot of dissociation and confusion that victims go through during trauma, and that's one way your body protects yourself. You can't remember details. Get a timeline mixed up. That's very common. And so because somebody can't answer a question or tells things out of order, or or saying things that are nonsensical, it's often their reaction, their bodily reaction to trauma. Their mind is trying to protect them. And I mean, I experienced that pretty significantly in the days that followed the abduction. It's all a blur to me. My friend Robin could tell you, what we did for a few days, and the people I talked with, conversations I had. There's some of them I don't remember. I couldn't tell you, what days those things happened, what order. It's all a blur to me, and that was more of where, I think after the shock of the trauma, you know, that was more significant for me afterwards. And that's not the same situation with every victim. There's going to be victims that aren't going to be able to answer questions, and that doesn't mean that they're lying. It doesn't mean that something didn't happen. It very well means that something did happen, and it's significant enough that their mind and body are trying to protect them. So I think, starting with believing someone and using their own body and capabilities in terms of telling their story and getting what info you need for your investigation. It may take time. For some people, it may be easier to speak with them sooner than later. For some, it may take time, which is hard.
Yeah, being coming from a law enforcement arena or world, I have seen law enforcement officers, and as you're working through this advocacy now, there are officers or law enforcement professionals that work harder to try to disprove what happened because, the timeline's not in the right order. So she has to be lying, then it throws everything else out. So I absolutely understand. Like, things aren't necessarily in chronological order. So I think it's important for investigators to understand that moving forward. And I'm sure you've seen that in your advocacy work.
Yeah, certainly I have people that reach out, survivors all the time that, have their own stories to tell that maybe I've never told their story before, or, you know, my situation is very unique in that most folks that survive, if they survive abduction and sexual assault, I don't know that that's the majority of folks that go through things like I went through. If they're lucky enough to be here, they often can't get convictions. Especially stalking, sexual assault, they're so underreported crimes. because there is so much, there's a lot of shade cast and at survivors and folks that make these claims. I can't think of anything that a survivor stands to really benefit from reporting in a false way. There's nothing about the SANE exam, there's nothing about the legal process that is fun or gives you attention in a good way. There's nothing that I feel like anybody really stands to gain from that other than trying to protect themselves. And I believe that the false reporting of those crimes is no higher than what it is for the false report of any other crime. It may be more difficult to put a case together because of a lack of evidence, because it can be a he said, she said, those types of things. But, starting with the person who's presenting and saying that there was a crime committed, start by believing them. That goes a long way in terms of having a cooperative, informant or victim, that they're going to trust you. They aren't going to feel like, oh, well, I've got to prove myself or there's things I can't say. You're going to get a whole lot more information from somebody if you're presenting to them as an ally and supportive of them. So, I mean, that's kind of the direction I would give to anybody working in law enforcement, that no matter what kind of story you hear or see, or what could come of it, you're going to have the best chance to get to the truth if you can, be an ally with this victim, if you can let them talk and hear their story, however fragmented it may be. It goes a long way.
Yeah. So Christopher, he eventually pled guilty to kidnapping, torture, aggravated stalking, and home evasion, right? What did that mean to you when he pled guilty, or the accountability of it?
I think it was a mixed bag. The charges, as you'll note in that list, there are no criminal sexual conduct charges. Those were what were pled out. And for me, that was particularly frustrating because, I wanted him to be labeled as a rapist. And he violated me significantly. And the fact that he wasn't willing to plead guilty or accept any of those charges or facts, to this day, he probably stands by the fact that he thinks I consented.
Yeah, I should have said that the lack of accountability in that sense. So for the sexual assault, so I'm sorry about that. When you were preparing your victim impact statement, what was it like for you to be able to address this and get some closure on it, if that is the right way to,
Yeah.
or the right term for it, for everything you experienced?
Yeah. I mean, I will say I was glad to not go through a whole trial. That can be very difficult for survivors just because it does call into question, everything about them and their experience. And I'm thankful I didn't have to go through that and that it was resolved more quickly than it might. It still took 2 years, but more quickly than maybe it would have been with a trial. The impact statement, I mean, it was a tough thing to do. It was important to me because the judge that was in charge of sentencing in this case was actually the judge that denied my PPO.
Which I actually found very ironic when I saw that. Like, here he is, when he says, no, you can't have the order, and a short time later, he is the sitting judge on the exact reason you wanted this order that he denied. Just the for him, I was just thinking, you
I
know,
could you could see the moment it clicked with him what the case was. It was like night and day. Like you could see him recalling the way he took his glasses off and looked. It was clear to him that he knew what this case was and that he had denied the PPO. Not that a piece of paper is gonna like he very well may have done that regardless of another PPO. But you could see it dawning on him that this is, something that somebody had requested a PPO for and I
I
denied,
was the
and
one
now
that
here we
said
are.
no. Right. Just that, yeah, for him. And I don't feel sorry for the judge at all. Just so you're saying, like, but he is accountable for it. And this is an example of our judicial system. The judges and the attorneys that work in these cases, there has to be some accountability, whether it's through their employment, but internal accountability, like I dropped the ball on that, and that's 100% on me as the judge, right? So,
And they make decisions that can influence life and death,
yeah, absolutely.
and it's really important.
Yeah, because this could have gotten even worse. This could have been like you didn't survive, and now he's the sitting judge and saying, "Oh my gosh, you know, had I acted or ruled in a different manner, she would still be here. But had I ruled in a different manner, maybe she wouldn't have been kidnapped and assaulted."
Yeah, he said some really, which I don't know that that's normal, but before I read my impact statement, I was a little caught off guard because am standing there. Christopher's 15 feet from me in an orange jumpsuit. Our families are there. It's a full courtroom. There's reporters, and I'm standing before this judge who had already denied my PPO, looking him in the face. And I don't know how much of it was featured in the Hulu special, but he, said, "You are the reason that you're here today in front of me. And, this court did let you down. And, regardless of that, something to the effect of like, you took your life in your own hands and you are brilliant. And, I'm very thankful that you're here today, and that you're here and can speak to what's happened." And it kind of caught me off guard because I'm like prepared to give this statement, and he has some things he says to me first, which I think is unusual. And I think that part of that is probably because he knew that the connection with this case and that he did screw it up initially.
Well, I think we can all agree with that part of the judge's statements, that it's through your resilience and your mental, your mental, your training, your mindset, that you were able to overcome that. So you were created as a result of that. Oh, get back to the sentence. So he got 40 to 60 years. Is that right?
Yeah, I read my statement, essentially to the judge and to the courtroom. I didn't really want to address Christopher per se because, that's how I started it, is that he's not listened to anything I've said in 15 years. And so I don't want to address him. I want to address everyone else present. And yeah, the judge considered a normal lifespan for him and sentenced outside the guidelines, 40 to 60 years in prison. And if he ever gets the option for parole when he's old, he's going to have a GPS tether. So, I'm in a very, it's not lost on me that most folks that are stalked don't get their stalkers behind bars and don't have the freedom like I do. I feel like I do to speak about my experience, because I don't have to live in fear of him coming after me again. And that's a very unique position for a survivor to be in.
It really is. He, when they're sentenced, criminals have an opportunity to address the court. Did he address the court, or did he address you?
He had some sort of a statement prepared, which he opted to not read. He apologized for to our families, to me, to folks about what he did and what had happened, and that he wishes he could take it back. And that's, unfortunately, it's too little, too late. Um,
So as a result of all of this, you created the Beekeepers Advocacy.
yeah. Which are you wondering why the name beekeepers?
Yeah, why did you name it Beekeepers?
So it's a multifaceted answer.
Sure.
So my
Probably
middle
not the
name is
first time you got this
Beatrice.
question.
What?
I said it's probably not the first time you got this question.
Not exactly, but often folks don't ask it for whatever reason, and I realize that it's like a why is it called this? So my middle name is Beatrice. I was named after my grandma Beatrice, and Christopher knew my middle name. I don't know if he intentionally chose sheets in the bunker that had bees on them because of that. My grandma always wore like bee brooches and pins and, things like that. Um, so I thought it was peculiar that there were bee sheets in the bunker. And, um, you think about bees, I'm like, we've got to call this group something. And I'm like, man, you think about bees and you think about
Yeah, hold on
what
just
bees
one
do.
second.
They're all,
Yeah, yeah. Okay, go ahead. You were coming in broken, but that
are we
was on
good?
my side. Yep.
Oh, okay. You think about bees, they work together. It's a lot like survivors. They work together for change. They protect one another. They're hard workers. They protect what's important to them. And so I chose beekeepers advocacy because it reminds me of survivors and advocates. It's a namesake for my beloved grandma, who was one of the first women in the Marines during World War II.
I was in the Marine
She
Corps.
really wonderful.
Yeah.
My grandparents met there. Yep.
Oh, fantastic.
But yeah, very dear to me. And so to me, that was kind of a way to tie my experience and things that are important to me together to survivorship.
So there's
So
a
yeah,
there's a Jason Statham movie called Beekeepers, because the beekeeper protects the hive, right?
yes, beekeepers do. Yes.
Yeah, they
Correct.
protect the hive. So when and I just wanted to get your take on it, but when I saw beekeepers, I'm like, she's protecting the hive. That's exactly what I thought when I saw this, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's a kind of a multifaceted name, but through that, I mean, I do get a lot of messages from survivors. I don't do like one-on-one counseling with survivors, at least at this point. I do a lot of work more in the education realm, with communities, college campuses, the general public, um, like women's shelters regarding stalking, sexual assault, those types of issues, as well as like law enforcement, physicians, medical professionals, that sort of thing, regarding having trauma-informed care. And, what does it look like from a survivor's perspective? How can we better train law enforcement to identify these red flags early on and provide better intervention?
Yeah, so while I was in law enforcement, and even now, I'm sorry, I work in the world of concealed carry and personal protection and things like that. I don't know your belief in concealed carry or firearms or anything like that, but we often tell women in a situation, to avoid situations like this, it's always better to have it and not need it. So do you think, and I don't know if you've had any concealed carry training, if you have firearms, certainly would have leveled the playing field from the start, right? Not that the situation would have been avoided, but it gives you a sense of extra protection through that training. Is that something that you had considered, or is it something that you consider now, or is it something that you would suggest women take that type of training?
I think that's a deeply like personal decision. Frankly, I had folks that suggested and encouraged that. I had never been one that, to me, the responsibility of owning a firearm is significant. To store it appropriately and safely, having folks that have access to it that shouldn't is a concern. Children, folks with mental health issues, accessibility. It's a lot in terms of responsibility, and it's not right for everyone. Um, because of that, that was something that I always, at that time before the kidnapping, I didn't have, and I didn't want to be faced with the decision of, do I shoot and potentially kill someone? And that's something I still struggle with to this day. I think for a lot of people, it can be a big peace of mind. It can provide, especially if you are well trained and store your firearm appropriately. It can bring folks a lot of peace of mind and protection in a situation if it does, heaven forbid, something like that happen to you. Great, but it's not for everybody. And I think,
100% agree.
yeah, and it shouldn't be something that folks try to force on you. It's something that I think you need to make your own decision on. And if you do, being trained in that and being comfortable with it. I think there's plenty of options for alternative, methods of protection and safeguards as well. And it certainly, is a nice thing that we here in the United States have as an option to pursue that a lot of places don't. So I think it's good for some people, but it's not an end all be all. I'm not convinced that if I did have a firearm in that day that, you know, could Christopher have gotten it from me? Could he have killed me? What would it have been like if I shot and killed him? How would the story have been different? I think about those things, and I don't know that I have a good answer to that question. I think it's very, different for every person.
Right. We advocate for that. A firearm is like absolute last resort, but there are other tools, and we talk to people about the other tools. And it doesn't even have to be like pepper spray or a knife, but it could be, personal protection training, jujitsu, like any sort of thing that will help you deter evil. And a lot of people don't know this, but the United States is the number one country for human trafficking out of all countries in the world per capita. So,
Believe it.
yeah, so if we can have tools, and it doesn't have to be firearms, it could be just situational awareness and surrounding and developing a plan to avoid situations, that happen in your life. And not every situation is avoidable. Your situation certainly wasn't avoidable, but there are, certain things that you can do to help prepare you to resist evil. Because, like, your back door, evil doesn't respect rules. It doesn't respect locked doors. It doesn't respect gates. It just doesn't respect people. So it's going to find a way if it's going to find a way if it has to, right? So if people are someone believes that they're being stalked, what should they start documenting immediately?
Yeah, I think certainly if there's communications that the person's sending you, if you can, take screenshots of conversations, save note, however they're communicating with you, preserving that evidence and your response if you choose to respond. If there's any photographic evidence, that sort of thing, getting kind of a paper trail, so to speak, so that You can provide hard evidence to police. You can make a report, and sometimes a squeaky wheel gets the grease. I hate to say that, but sometimes it does take several reports. Sometimes it does take several attempts at PPOs. The more evidence you're armed with, the more likely you are to have someone provide that assistance. I think certainly doing common sense type of things, making sure a friend or family member knows where you are, that you have plans, that you vary your routes. Your people know who this person is that you're concerned about. And trying to not antagonize them, I think can be big too, especially if you're dealing with somebody potentially with mental health issues, and that could be aggravated or become agitated. I mean, those things are significant, but I think documenting is huge. And yeah, keeping yourself safe, looking into some of those options for your own physical safety, whether it's things as simple as locks and cameras, pepper spray, like any tools really that can help you if you do run into a sticky situation to de-escalate it.
Sure, of course, of course. So, we often say the safest fight that you'll ever be involved in is one that you're not there for. So if you can avoid these situations, I know it's kind of an statement or whatever, however you want to say it, like the safest fight that you'll ever be involved in is one you're not there for. But it's true. If you can avoid those situations and change things up, I think certainly it'll help you down the road. But
And
you would say, go ahead.
I will say, if you're early on in a stage of stalking, this is somebody getting allies and folks that know this person, try to get that person help. Early intervention and prevention, it's one thing. I can keep myself safe. If it's not me, it's going to be somebody else. So preventing the person from doing it to begin with, maybe if Christopher had had more mentors or mental health, assistance earlier on, potentially this might not have happened. I can never say for sure, but, you know, trying to get the person help if that's what they need. Oftentimes, folks that stalk do have other mental health issues. So I think that's an important piece too.
Yeah. How do we and all our viewers, how do we support you? Where do we find you? How do we support you?
Yeah, I think not supporting me, but supporting survivors more broadly. Sometimes it's little things, teaching your children about consent in broad terms. Your body is your own. If you say no, someone should honor that. And if they don't, letting an adult know. Those are some basic steps for helping folks grow up and to be teenagers and young adults that understand consent and understand boundaries, are important because it helps you identify when there's something wrong sooner. And I mean, that's one thing, in terms of survivors. I think, putting your money and your vote to things that, support survivors in this type of work, to laws that make getting PPOs easier to fund, domestic violence work, those kinds of things. Those are all important. Providing during Stalking Awareness Month in January or Sexual Assault Awareness Month, doing things like sharing simple infographics or someone's story, with someone that or sharing it on social media. Those are things that make a difference. Speaking up when you hear inappropriate jokes that make light of rape and sexual assault. Those things go a long way. And when a survivor of something like that hears that kind of joke, it's hurtful. And, 1 in 3 women in their lifetime will be sexually assaulted in some sort of way. So, our words are really important. More broadly, I mean, obviously you can visit beekeepersadvocacy.org, in terms of educational resources. I've got some resources on my website. If you're interested in having, a discussion in your community or having training, you can certainly reach out to me. I think sometimes just realizing that things like this can happen to folks, can be pretty powerful too.
Yeah, I got to tell you, what kind of stands out to me about all of this is your courage to be able to share your story. And the, I mean, you're very, I'll just say you're intelligent, your intelligence, and to be able to share this experience, this unimaginable experience that, you know, you didn't let define you. So this doesn't define you. This is something that happened to you. And I just want to say thank you for trusting us with your story, right?
Yeah.
And standing behind survivors out there, and helping those people avoid situations like this in the future. So to learn more about Samantha's work and support her mission, visit Beekeepers Advocacy. And what was the website again?
Beekeepersadvocacy.org.
Perfect. And if you're currently experiencing stalking, domestic violence, sexual violence, please contact a victim support group or victim service group like Beekeepers Advocacy or any other group, and report it. Report it early to law enforcement so they can get this documented and get a paper trail on these things, and help protect you, because that's really what the ultimate goal is for everyone. So Samantha, thank you for joining us on The Warrior's Way.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Of course. And we'll see you next time on The Warrior's Way.